Hello everyone, back tuning in to our latest Star Wars video. So we're going to look at George Lucas for this Star Wars video and his relationship with Kathleen Kennedy. So we're going to be asking the question, did Kathleen Kennedy betray George Lucas? The big unresolved question about all of what's happened with Star Wars and with Disney, with Lucasfilm over the past few years is the one thing we never really have been able to find out is why did George Lucas walk away from the franchise? Why did he walk away from Star Wars? Now, we know, obviously, that George sold Star Wars along with Lucasfilm Limited and all its other assets, so the rights to Star Wars, the rights to Indiana Jones, the rights to Skywalker Sound and Industrial Light and Magic. The whole lot was sold off and brought by Disney. Now, before that happened, Lucas went to Kathleen Kennedy and asked her to become the president of Lucasfilm. So she would be kind of like a guiding light, if you like, on Lucasfilm or with Lucasfilm underneath the umbrella of Disney Studios, so that when Lucas retired, he would still have Kathleen running the day-to-day management of Lucasfilm Limited and also obviously the Star Wars projects and all of the other assets within the Lucasfilm umbrella, like Industrial Light and Magic, and so on. Now, in 2013, Lucas walked away from Star Wars. He severed all ties. And the question we're asking is whether Kathleen Kennedy betrayed George Lucas. So the picture that we see here is from 2012. And it's the moment where the announcement has been made that George is selling off Star Wars and he's selling off Lucasfilm, but he's also got story treatments for the sequel trilogy, episodes 7, 8 and 9, and Kathleen Kennedy is his chosen successor, if you like. She is going to develop episodes 7, 8 and 9, the sequel trilogy, as she oversees Lucasfilm. And that picture is taken directly from the interview that was conducted at the time George Lucas announced he was selling Lucasfilm to Disney. So let's get into this. And we're going to go, first of all, to starwars.net.com. I'm going to leave a link to the three websites we're using for this video within the description in YouTube. So this is a transcript of the interview that was conducted between George Lucas and Kathleen Kennedy on the day it was announced, which is, I think, looking at that, October 19, 2012, the day it was announced that Lucas was selling Star Wars and Lucasfilm, all of the other assets, to Disney. So a little bit of background on it says on 19th of October 2012, as the public announcement about the future of Lucasfilm and Star Wars approached, George Lucas and Kathleen Kennedy sat down with Lynn Hale, Senior Director of Public Relations for Lucasfilm, to discuss the news that the Walt Disney Company entered an agreement to acquire Lucasfilm Limited, and that there would be 3 new Star Wars films. And this is taken from Star Wars Insider. That's the official fan magazine. Star Wars Insider has the print exclusive. So, first of all, George Lucas is saying in the interview, let's just highlight that, I always said I wasn't going to do any more, and that's true, because I'm not going to do them. But that doesn't mean I'm unwilling to turn them over to Kathleen, that's Kathleen Kennedy, of course, to do more. I have story treatments of episodes 7, 8, and 9, and a bunch of other movies, and obviously we have hundreds of books and comics and everything you could possibly imagine. I moved that treasure trove of stories and various things to Kathleen, and I have complete confidence that she's going to take them and make great movies. It's the same philosophy behind Indiana Jones. I came up with Indiana Jones. I would love to take it to my friends. I'd say this is a fantastic movie, it's going to be great, but I don't want to make it. I just want to go see it. I don't want to have to do the work part. Steven Spielberg jumped on it immediately and said, I'll do that movie. It's the same thing. I wanted to see that movie, but I don't want to go through the drudgery of actually making it. So now I'm taking the difficult part of Star Wars and I'm turning it over to Kathleen, and I look forward to being like a regular audience member and seeing it for the first time and saying, oh my God, the one thing I missed in life is that I never got to see Star Wars. I never got that moment where I walked into a theatre and I was blown away, because I already knew that it was nothing but hard-taken problems to create it, of course, which is always the way it is for a filmmaker. They never see the movie, they only see the process of what they had to go through. Maybe this will give me the chance to actually walk in and be surprised. I'm going to be going from a creator to a fan. I get to be a fan now, and I look forward to it. It's a lot more fun than actually having to go out in the mud and the snow and make a movie. Kathleen Kennedy says you can actually blog about what we're doing and how we're messing things up. Lucas, no, I'm just saying, gosh, they're out in the snow and it's cold and I know they're having a difficult time, and that's what they like to do. One of Lynn Hale, who's conducting the interview, asked, what advice do you have for Kathleen as she starts these films? Lucas, good luck, laughs. No, I don't have to give Kathleen advice. She knows what to do. She knows better than I do. That's the best part about this, is that it's not somebody who I have to explain anything to. I mean, I can tell you the mythology. That's all my job is, to be the keeper of the flame, and just make sure that it's consistent. So George is saying that at this point in time, in 2012, when he's selling Star Wars and Lucasfilm and Kathleen Kennedy is going to take over, he's still going to be around, but his job is going to be the keeper of the flame of Star Wars, and also to make sure that the films are consistent. That's consistent artistically, consistent in terms of the mythology, consistent in terms of how things like the Force works, and consistent in terms of the characters. That's an important quote. And then Kennedy comes along and says, I'd like to think as we move forward that the fans are on board. They help us. They support what it is we're trying to do. This is critical. The main thing, let's highlight it again. The main thing, this is Kathleen Kennedy, the main thing is to protect these characters, and that they still continue to live in the way that George created them, and that the universe of Star Wars continues to grow in ways that they can get excited about. Everybody involved in trying to create these films are fans too, and that is what we are trying to protect. Let's do that again. So George is saying his job is to be keeper of the flame. His job, now that Star Wars has been sold to Disney and Kathleen Kennedy is overseeing production of sequel trilogy with Lucasfilm, his job is to be keeper of the flame and to make sure the sequel trilogy and the films that are going to be created are consistent. That's George's job. He's quite clear about what his role is now. Kathleen Kennedy is saying the main thing is to protect these characters and that they continue to live in the way George created them. So there's the first betrayal, really, because the way the characters have been developed within the sequel trilogy is not consistent with the way George created them. So Luke Skywalker goes from being the most optimistic man in the galaxy, the man who turned his father from the dark side to the light, the man who was willing to lay down his life for the love of his father. He goes from that into what we see in The Last Jedi, which is a Luke Skywalker who is depressed, who is actually, I think, on the verge of suicide, although it's never actually stated within the film, but I think he's suicidal, and at the moment Rey finds him. He's planning to commit suicide. I think that is the unstated sort of beginning of the character of Luke Skywalker at the end of The Last Jedi. At the end of The Force Awakens, I should say, and the beginning of The Last Jedi. So Luke is depressed, he's probably suicidal, he's gone to this island to die, he wants to kill off the Jedi Knights, he wants nothing more to do with the Force, he wants nothing more to do with the Jedi. It's revealed through The Last Jedi that he's tried to murder his son, Ben Solo, who becomes the main villain, Kylo Ren. So the path that Ben Solo takes to the dark side begins with Luke singing into his bedroom in the dead of night after having some sort of a vision, even though Yoda has told him in past films that always in motion the future is. So what you see within visions of the future cannot be guaranteed, they're not certain to occur, but despite that, Luke has this vision that his nephew Ben Solo is going to cause tremendous suffering to the galaxy, and so he sneaks into his nephew's bedroom, who at this point is still a child, or a young adult, I suppose. He ignites his lightsaber and he's planning to murder his nephew. Now, he does have second thoughts, he does step back from it, but it's an extremely shocking moment. It's an extreme moment, actually, within the Star Wars saga. Luke is just a totally different character to the Luke Skywalker that we have in the original trilogy. Remember, Kathleen Kennedy in this interview is saying that her priority is to protect the characters and that they will continue to live in the way that George Lucas created them. In no way, in no sense, does the Luke Skywalker that we see in The Last Jedi, whose character is totally assassinated, he chucks away his father's lightsaber in his opening scene, throws it away like it's a piece of trash, and doesn't matter. And from that moment on, it's a continuous hammer blow, hammer after hammer after hammer on the character. In no way does the Luke Skywalker from The Last Jedi in any way reflect the Luke Skywalker from the original trilogy, until the final sort of 10-15 minutes where he shows up as a force projection, has a nice scene with his sister, Carrie Fisher, Princess Leia, does a force projection in front of Kylo Ren and the First Order, and then alone on the island where he has sort of become a hermit for no particular reason why he's done it, other than that his nephew turned to the dark side. He's very depressed. He wants the Jedi to die, and he's the last Jedi, so if he's on this island alone, he kills himself, then the Jedi will die with him. But at the point after the force projection, he's on the island alone, he looks at the sun, and then he dies. So you kind of get 10 minutes, maybe a little bit less, where Luke kind of reverts back towards some sort of semblance of the Luke that we knew from the original trilogy. But to be honest, at no point is the Luke in The Last Jedi the Luke that we leave in Return of the Jedi. Mark Hamill is on record as saying that he regards the Luke Skywalker he played in The Last Jedi as kind of like Jake Skywalker. He called him Jake Skywalker, in that he just bears no resemblance to the Luke that he knew. Is a totally different character. And so how does changing Luke into a completely different character in The Last Jedi, how is that consistent with Kathleen Kennedy claiming that in 2012 that her main priority was, and I quote, to protect the characters and so that they continue to live in the way that George created them? How do those two events possibly marry up with one another? And then there's also Han Solo, of course, who in The Force Awakens is revealed as a deadbeat dad, and the progression that he takes from Star Wars A New Hope, the original Star Wars, to Return of the Jedi, all of that character progression in terms of being a selfish character, and he's not a villainous character in A New Hope, but he's definitely a selfish character. He's out for himself, he's in it for the money, he's in it for himself, he doesn't care about the rebellion. He doesn't care about the princess's plight, really. He just finds himself on the Death Star and caught up in this adventure to rescue the princess. But his main priority is, until the very end of Star Wars A New Hope, his main priority is to get the money, get the reward, pay off Jabba the Hutt, and presumably have a bit of money left over for himself. So he's quite a selfish character in that film. By the time you get through to Return of the Jedi, he's a selfless character. He's willing to pretty much sacrifice his life for the princess and for the rebellion. In fact, you probably get to that in The Empire Strikes Back. At the end of The Empire Strikes Back, he gets put into carbonite, and it's unknown at the time whether he's going to live or whether he's going to die. So again, he's probably, even in The Empire Strikes Back, becoming a selfless character, but certainly by Return of the Jedi, he has progressed from a selfish character to a selfless character. And all of that character progression that you get through the original trilogy is totally wiped out by the time you get through to The Force Awakens. He has abandoned his marriage to Princess Leia, and he's been a deadbeat dad to Ben Solo, who becomes chief villain Kylo Ren. He's reverted to his life as a smuggler. So again, he's just in it for himself. He's out for himself. He doesn't care about the wider implications of the galaxy. Particularly, he doesn't care about his son running rampant and murdering people as Kylo Ren. Doesn't seem to be particularly bothered about that in the early part of the film. Eventually, he does go and try to bring his son back to the light and tries to bring him home back to his mother, Princess Leia, but he gets killed for his efforts. But really, the work or the progression of the character from or through the original trilogy is pretty much wiped out with Han Solo in The Force Awakens, at least until sort of the end of the film. But much more dramatically so is what they did with Luke Skywalker. With Princess Leia, I suppose she's kind of consistent to the Leia that we saw in the original trilogy. She's not really in it enough to be able to form much of a view about her character. What does stand out with her in the sequel trilogy with Princess Leia is that there's no progression of the character from where we leave her in Return of the Jedi. In fact, she probably regresses as a character. So you will think within 30 years from Return of the Jedi to Force Awakens, there would have been some character development with this character, but actually she's still very much fighting her causes. She's fighting not with the rebellion this time, but with the resistance, which is kind of like the same thing as the rebellion. Really, that's something else that's quite annoying about the sequel trilogy. Everything is still the same as in the original trilogy. So instead of the Empire, you have the First Order. Instead of the rebellion, you have the resistance. But essentially, they're just the same things with different names, really. Even though the Empire gets defeated at the end of Return of the Jedi, and you would think that it would be what is called the Resistance. That would actually be the New Republic. That would be running the show. There's no sort of mention of the New Republic, or very little, in terms of what the political setup is within the galaxy far, far away at this point. So that's all kind of annoying, but that's secondary, really. Let's go back to Princess Leia. Again, there's no real character progression with her character from the original trilogy to the sequel trilogy. I would like to see her maybe as a leader of the planet, possibly as the presumably the New Republic would go back to what it was with the Old Republic and have the Supreme Chancellor or something. So you would expect Princess Leia, maybe Leia Organa or Leia Solo, would become kind of like leader of the galaxy after the victory that she had over the Empire with a band of freedom fighters, maybe. So it would be nice to see some sort of development of the character, maybe into a more mature sort of leadership role, something along those lines. But we just see her very much as she is at the end of Return of the Jedi, really, in terms of who she is as a character. But I think out of the three of them, she comes out the best, most definitely. They don't actually destroy her character. She's just the same as she was back in the original trilogy, whereas with Han Solo, and particularly so with Luke Skywalker, the characters are damaged with Han Solo, but with Luke Skywalker, the character is pretty much assassinated. So it's all very nice at this point in 2012, but let's see how things are as we get through to 2015, just before The Force Awakens is going to be released. So at this point, things have gone very, very sour. This is from Variety.com, and Lucas is doing an interview before The Force Awakens comes out. This is kind of like a report of the interview, but before The Force Awakens comes out, Lucas does an interview on the television. It lasts for an hour. It's a very long interview. With Charlie Rose. And let's just read you a little bit of this. So while Disney has to be pleased with the way the $4 billion acquisition of Lucasfilm is turning out, thanks to the galactic success of Star Wars: The Force Awakens. Remember, this is a report of an interview Lucas did before The Force Awakens. The report has been put onto Variety after The Force Awakens has come out. So again, the Disney is very pleased with the way things turned out with the gigantic success of Star Wars: The Force Awakens. The man who created the Star Wars universe doesn't feel the same way, however. In an interview with Charlie Rose, George Lucas spoke about everything from his Disney branching vision to the deal itself. Lucas, who has always been protective of his series and even refers to them as his kids, hasn't been looking back well on the deal with Disney. I sold them to white slavers, George Lucas says. They are people that take these things and, Lucas said before laughing and deciding it would be better not to finish. See interview below. Lucas mentions white slavers at around the 50-minute mark. So the father of Star Wars then opened up about why he and Disney were split on their decisions for the franchise. They looked at the stories and they said, we want to make something for the fans, Lucas said. They decided they didn't want to use those stories. That's the story treatments Lucas mentioned in 2012 that he was turning over to Kathleen Kennedy to develop. So they decided they didn't want to use those stories. They decided they were going to do their own thing. They weren't that keen to have me involved anyway. But if I get in there, I'm just going to cause trouble because they're not going to do what I want them to do. I don't have the control to do that anymore. And all I would do is muck everything up, he said. And I said, okay, I will go my own way and I'll let them go their way. Star Wars: The Force Awakens has been a massive success. In the 2 weeks it's been out, becoming the 9th highest grossing film ever, becoming the 9th highest box office performer ever, with 1.23 billion in global box office receipts up to that point, which is around a couple of weeks after Force Awakens has been released. Let's highlight that again, Lucas in his own words. So after saying when he sold the company in 2012 that he was going to be an overseer, he was going to hold the torch for Star Wars, and he was going to make sure the films that were created were consistent, now he's saying they looked at the stories, episodes 7, 8 and 9, the story treatments he gave to them, and they said, we want to make something for the fans, Lucas said. They decided they didn't want to use those stories. They decided they were going to do their own thing. They weren't keen to have me involved anyway. So at this point, we have to think, who is the they that George Lucas is talking about? And obviously, he's talking about Disney. So Disney is primarily managed by Bob Iger. He's like the president of Disney, and then of course you've got all the people lower down underneath him. But does the they also include Kathleen Kennedy? Kathleen Kennedy, who in 2012 had promised that she was going to remain consistent to the characters that Lucas had created, and that Lucas had said he was going to make sure they stayed consistent to those characters. do we assume that they didn't want me involved? They wanted to do their own thing. Do we think that includes Kathleen Kennedy? It's very difficult to say because Lucas has never spoken about exactly who the they was that didn't want to have him around. But I think it's a fair assumption that after the sale, Kathleen Kennedy decided, along with Bob Iger and the other sort of higher-ups at Disney, I think between them they decided they didn't want to use George Lucas's stories. They wanted to do something else, and they discarded George Lucas' story drafts, and in so doing they turned the characters that George Lucas had created, Han Solo, Princess Leia, and particularly Luke Skywalker, into different characters. And I think that's the reason George Lucas walked away from this. I think he could see that they were going to do something very different with the characters he created. He was supposedly within the team on board as sort of somebody who could keep the characters consistent. He could see they were not going to keep his characters consistent. I think that's the primary reason he wanted to walk away from the sequel trilogy. Obviously, they changed his story outlines as well, so we go from sort of a plotted three-part story of 7, 8 and 9 into a situation where it's very much being made up on the fly. There's no real planning to anything. Each director, J.J. Abrams and Rian Johnson, are just making the thing up as they're going along. So, I mean, that's not really a way to make a trilogy. You want to know at the beginning where you're kind of going to go to in the later films and later episodes, even if you take detours as you go along. You want to have a broad sort of idea of what's going to happen within this sort of set of films. What story are we trying to tell? Why are we trying to tell it? Where are we going with this story? Whereas the way the sequel trilogy is being made up, it's pretty much all being thrown together, and each director is doing their own thing, going off in their own directions, and there's no sort of planning going into anything. It's just very much being made up on the fly. So I would think that would annoy Lucas creatively, but I think the real reason he walked away from this is that he could see that his characters were going to be developed in a way that was very, very, very different to how he had always envisioned them and how they were in his films. And that would mean that instead of having a 9-part saga where everything is kind of working out nicely with one another, where the characters are consistent as you're moving through the saga from episode 1 right way to episode 9. Instead of having that, you would have characters that were just totally different to the character progression. They cancelled the character progression of the earlier films, and in some ways they're totally different characters. And I think that would be enough for George to say, right, that's it, I'm out. I'm not going to be involved with this at all. All the other stuff is important, like making up on the fly, not having a consistent, coherent plan, and bringing everything back to kind of like the Rebellion Empire situation, although with different names. All of that would annoy Lucas creatively, but to actually get to walk away from it and say, I'm not going to be involved in this, I think that's to do with the characters. And even if the idea to do this came from Disney, I think Kathleen Kennedy has to take a lot of the responsibility for the mess. And let's not beat about the bush. The sequel trilogy, creatively, financially it's very good, but creatively the sequel trilogy is a real mess, and we don't know what and I think Kathleen Kennedy has to take responsibility for that. We don't know what assurances Lucas had at the time of the sale from Kathleen Kennedy. Obviously, at the time 2012, he is trusting Kathleen with this, and he believes she's going to be a great overseer. So we don't know if Kathleen gave him actual assurances, but we assume that George is very pleased to be handing over his life's work to this woman, to Kathleen Kennedy. We don't know whether Disney gave him any assurances at the point of the sale. Probably not. But I think George would have assumed that Kathleen would have stayed consistent to his visions. I would imagine he would have been very surprised when they sort of discarded his story drafts, and very, very surprised and probably quite shocked when they started to develop characters that were totally at odds with the characters that he had created. And Mark Hamill is very unhappy about this, as he appears to be very unhappy about the whole journey of the sequel trilogy, as we discussed in an earlier video. So finally, we're at slashfilm.com, and this is an interview Mark Hamill gave when the Last Jedi was released in 2017. So let's just get into this. Finally, when Disney acquired Lucasfilm in 2012, it turned the Star Wars franchise upside down, with the creator of that galaxy far, far away, George Lucas, of course, relinquishing his creative control to new filmmakers. Lucas was kept on as a creative consultant, in brackets, to Disney's new Star Wars trilogy, which began in 2015 with Star Wars The Force Awakens. But Lucas' close friend and collaborator Mark Hamill bemoans the fact that the director's advice to Disney was thrown out of the window. Star Wars is the defining science fiction series of the past 40 years. How many directors can boast that on their resume? But George Lucas may have lost a lot of goodwill he had creating Star Wars with those convoluted and much maligned prequels. Basically, you can't have a sequel trilogy article without some sort of dig at the prequel trilogy. That's rubbish. Don't worry at all about that. But is that enough for Disney to completely shut him out of the creative process for the new Star Wars trilogy? Lucas received a creative consultant title for the new Star Wars films in 2013, but Disney reportedly scrapped his ideas for a new trilogy in favour of what eventually would become the story of The Force Awakens, and obviously Last Jedi, and the soon-to-be-released Episode 9. Lucas was not the only one who was miffed about that. His long-time friend Mark Hamill, who received the breakout role of his career thanks to Lucas casting him in Star Wars A New Hope, was also upset in his stead. I think that says. In an interview with Metro, Hamill lamented that Disney ignored George Lucas' advice for episodes 7, 8 and 9. And this is the quote from Hamill. What I wish is that they have been more accepting of his guidance and advice, because he had an outline for 7, 8 and 9, and it was vastly different to what they have done. And then the article goes on, it's possible that fragments of Lucas' original outlines remained within the new trilogy. We did learn that in the 70s, Lucas had asked Hamill if he could reprise his role as a wizened Luke Skywalker, much like he does in The Last Jedi. But otherwise, Lucas has stepped back from the franchise he once created, though not without making the occasional cutting remark about Disney. It goes on to say, we don't know what the series would have been like if Lucas had had a more prominent role in crafting it, in crafting the new trilogy. With Disney at the helm, he probably would have been forced to roll back the stilted dialogue, and so on. It basically goes on to have a good dig at the prequel trilogy. And so we won't bother with that anymore. Let's just finish with Mark's quote, though. Again, what I wish is that they had been more accepting of his guidance and advice, because he had an outline for episodes 7, 8 and 9, and it was vastly different to what they have done. Now, again, who is the they that Mark is talking about there? He says, I wish they had been more accepting of his guidance and advice. He had an outline 7, 8 and 9, and it was vastly different to what they have done. Now, the they is obviously going to be Disney, but does the they also include Kathleen Kennedy? I would say yes, almost certainly the they does include Kathleen Kennedy. She has not honoured her, in my opinion, she has not honoured the commitment she gave to George Lucas and to Star Wars fans at the time of the sale, when she said she was going to stay consistent to the characters. It was her priority to make sure that the characters lived as Lucas had created them, and Lucas said he was going to make sure that not only did he carry the torch for Star Wars, but that he also would make sure that the characters stayed consistent and also that the mythology stayed consistent. So you make your own mind up on this, really. We don't have any definitive evidence that Kathleen Kennedy betrayed George Lucas, but I would say, looking at the evidence, sifting through the quotes, it's almost certain that Kathleen Kennedy has professionally, artistically betrayed George Lucas, because she promised to make sure the characters would be consistent to living in a way that he had created them. That did not happen, or has not happened with the sequel trilogy. It certainly didn't happen with Luke Skywalker in The Last Jedi. So artistically, I think definitely Kathleen Kennedy has betrayed George Lucas. And personally, in terms of George feeling he's got to step away from the franchise, he'd left Kathleen Kennedy in charge of his lifetime's work. He believed she was going to honour his life's work, and instead he's had to step away from it. He's had a personal betrayal. The jury's out on that a little bit more, because we don't know what role Disney has had in that. So potentially she has personally betrayed George Lucas. Artistically, I would say she has definitely betrayed George Lucas and the characters he created. Right, long video, and I'm not normally planning to have the videos this long. Primarily videos will be around 10-15 minutes, but there was a lot to get into with this one, and I hope you find it interesting and informative. Now, please like, share and subscribe to the Gavin Partridge YouTube channel. We've just recreated this channel. We've just it's just had a rebirth, if you like, after being dormant for 5 years. So we was demonetized by YouTube because the channel was not having new content. We lost a lot of our subscribers. They moved over to another channel, etc, etc. So we want to get monetization back on the channel. We need to get to 1,000 subscribers, 1,000 subscribers. We're over 600 subscribers now. So please like, share and subscribe, and let's try and build the channel up together. There'll be new Star Wars content coming very, very soon, but that's all for now, and thanks for watching.